हेलो फ्रेंड, चैप्टर 13 है हमारा बायोडाइवर्सिटी एंड कंजर्वेशन। 13.1 है बायोडाइवर्सिटी। 13.2 बायोडाइवर्सिटी कंजर्वेशन। If an alien from a distant galaxy were on to visit our planet Earth, the first thing that would amaze and baffle him would most probably be the enormous diversity of life that they would encounter. Even for humans, the rich variety of living organisms with which they share this planet never ceases to astonish and fascinate us. The common man would find it hard to believe that there are more than 20,000 species of ants and 3 lakh species of beetles and 28,000 species of fishes and nearly 20,000 species of orchids. Ecologists and evolutionary biologists have been trying to understand the significance of such diversity by asking important questions. Why are there so many species? Did such great diversity exist throughout Earth's history? How did this diversification come about? And why is this diversity important to the biosphere? Would it function any different if the diversity was much less? How do humans benefit from the diversity of life? 13.1 biodiversity in our biosphere. Amnescence, diversity or heterogeneity exists not only at the species level but at all levels of biological organization, ranging from macromolecules within cells onto biomes. Biodiversity is the term popularized by the sociologist Edward Wilson to describe the combined diversity at all the levels of biological organization. The most important of them are genetic diversity. A single species might show high diversity at the genetic level over its distributional range. The genetic variation shown by the medicinal plant Ralphia hominitoria, growing in different Himalayan ranges, might be in terms of potency and concentration of the active chemical reserpine that the plant produces. India has more India has more than 50,000 genetically different strains of rice and 1,000 varieties of mango. The second species diversity. The diversity at the species level. For example, the Western Ghats have greater amphibian species diversity than in the Eastern Ghats. A third, ecological diversity at the ecosystem level. India, for instance, with its deserts, rainforests, mangroves, coral reefs, wetlands, estuaries, and alpine meadows, has a greater ecosystem diversity than a Scandinavian country like Norway. It has taken millions of years of evolution to accumulate this rich diversity in nature, but we could lose all that wealth in less than two countries if the present rates of species less losses continue. Biodiversity and its conservation are now vital environmental issues of international concern. As more and more people around the world begin to realize the critical importance of biodiversity for our survival and well-being on this planet. 13.1.1. How many species are there on Earth and how many in India? Since there are published records of all the species discovered and named, we know how many species in all have been recorded so far, but it is not easy to answer the question of how many species there are on Earth. According to the International Union of Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources (IUCN) 2004, the total number of plant and animal species described so far is slightly more than 1.5 million, but we have no clear idea of how many species are yet to be discovered or described. Many taxonomic groups, species inventories now are more complete. Now, in large proportion of the species waiting to be discovered are in the tropics. Richness of an exhaustively studied group of insects are extreme polite on this estimate of the total number of species on Earth. Some extreme estimates range from 20 to 50 million, but a more conservative and scientifically sound the estimate made by Robert May places the global species diversity at about 7 million. Let us look at some interesting aspects about Earth's biodiversity based on the currently available species in the inventories. More than 70% of biospheres gymnosperms and angiosperms comprise no more than 22% of the total among animals. Insects are the most species, most species rich taxonomic group making up more than 70% of the total. That means out of every 10 animals on this planet, 7 are insects. Again, how fungi species in the world is more than the combined total of the species of fishes, amphibians, reptiles, and mammals in figure 30.1. Biodiversity is depicted showing species number of major taxa, invertebrates, vertebrates, plants. 13 figure 13.1 representing global biodiversity proportionate number of species major taxa of traits invertebrates and vertebrates. It should be noted that these estimates do not give any figure of for prokaryotes or biologists are not some about how many prokaryotic species are there might be. The problem is that conventional taxonomic methods are not suitable for identifying microbial species, and many species are simply not culturable under laboratory conditions. If we accept biochemical or molecular criteria for delineating species for this group, then their biodiversity alone might run into millions. As of India has only 2.4% of the world's land area, its share of the global species diversity is an impressive 8.1%. That is what makes our country one of the 12 mega diversity countries of the world. Nearly 45,000 species of plants and twice as many of animals have been recorded from India. How many living species are actually there waiting to be discovered and harmed? If we accept May's global estimates, only 22% of the total species have been recorded so far. Applying this proportion to India diversity figures, we estimate that there are properly is breed to be discovered and described. Would we ever be able to complete the inventory of the biological wealth or of our country? Consider the immense trend of manpower, taxonomists, and the time required to complete the job. The situation appears more hopeless when we realize that a large fraction of the species faces the threat of becoming extinct even before we discover them. Nature's biological library is burning even before we cataloged the titles of all the books stocked there. 13.1.2 Patterns of biodiversity, latitudinal gradients. The diversity of plants and animals is not uniform throughout the world but shows a rather even distribution. For many group of animals or plants, there are interesting patterns of diversity. The most well-known being the latitudinal gradient in diversity. In general, species diversity decreases as we move away from the equator towards the poles, with very few exceptions. Tropics latitudinal range of 23.5 degree north to 23.5 degrees south harbor more species than temperate or polar areas. Colombia, located near the equator, has nearly 1,400 species of birds, while New York, at 41 degree north, and 105 species, and Greenland, at 771 degree north, and 56 species. India, with much of its land area in the tropical latitudes, has more than 1,200 species of birds. A forest in a tropical region like equator has up to 10 times as many species of vascular plants as a forest of equal area in temperate regions like the Midwest of the USA. The largely tropical Amazonian rainforest in South America has the greatest biodiversity on Earth. It is home to more than 40,000 species of plants, 3,000 of fishes, 1,300 of birds, 427 of mammals, 427 of amphibians, 378 of reptiles, and more than 1 lakh 25,000 invertebrates. Scientists estimate that in this rain forests there might be at least 2 million insect species waiting to be discovered and named. What is so special about tropics that might account for their greater biological diversity? Ecologists and evolutionary biologists have proposed various hypotheses. Some important ones are speciation, generally a function of time, unlike temperate regions subjected to frequent glaciation in the past. Tropical latitudes have remained relatively undisturbed for millions of years and thus had a long evolutionary time for species diversification. Tropical environments, unlike temperate ones, are less seasonal, relatively more constant and predictable. Such constant environments promote niche specialization and lead to a greater species diversity, and the is more solar energy available in the tropics, which contributes in higher productivity. This in turn might contribute indirectly to greater diversity. Second, species area relationships. During his pioneering and extensive explorations in the wilderness of South American jungles, the great German naturalist and geographer Alexander von Humboldt observed that within a region, species richness increased with increasing explored area, but only up to a limit. In fact, the relation between species richness and area for a wide variety of taxa, angiosperm plants, birds, bats, freshwater fishes turns out to be a rectangular hyperbola. Figure 13.2 on a logarithmic scale. The relationship is a straight line described by the equation log s is equal to log c plus z log a, where s is equal to species richness, a is equal to area, z is equal to slope of the line, regressions coefficient, c is equal to y-intercept. Ecologists have discovered that the value of z lies in the range of 1.1 and zero point 0.2, regardless of the taxonomic group or the region, whether it is the plants of Britain, birds in California, or mollusks in New York State. The slopes of regression line are amazingly similar. But if you analyze the species area relationships among very large areas like the entire continents, you will find that the slope of the line to be much steeper. Z values in the range of zero point 0.6 to 1.2, for example, for frutivores, fruit-eating birds and mammals in the tropical forests of different continents. The slope is found to be 1.15. What do steeper slopes mean in this context? The importance of species diversity to the ecosystem. Does the number of species in the community really matter to the functioning of the ecosystem? This is a question for which ecologists have not been able to give a definite answer. For many decades, ecologists believed that communities with more species generally tend to be more stable than those with less species. What is exactly is stability for a biological community? A stable community should not show too much variation in productivity from year to year. Neither it must be either resistant or resilient to occasional disturbances, natural or man-made, and it uh, must also be resistant to invasions by alien species. We don't know how these attributes are linked to species richness in a community, but David Tillman's long-term ecosystem experiments using outdoor plots provide some tentative answers. Tillman found that plots with more species showed less year-to-year variation in total biomass. He also showed that in his experiments increased diversity contributed to higher productivity. Although we may not understand completely how species richness contributes to well-being of an ecosystem, we know enough to realize that rich biodiversity is not only essential for ecosystem health but imperative for the very survival of the human race on this planet. At a time when we are losing species at an alarming pace, one might ask one might ask, does one might ask, does it really matter to us if few species become extinct? Would Western Ghats ecosystem be less functional if one of its tree frog species is lost forever? How is our quality of life affected if, say, instead of 20,000, we have only 15,000 species of ants on Earth? There are no direct answers onto such a life questions, but we can develop a proper perspective through an analogy. And the river proper hypothesis used by Stanford ecologist Paul Enrich, so, Ehrlich, in an airplane ecosystem. All parts are joined together using thousands of rivers spaces. If every passenger traveling in it starts popping a rivet to take home, causing species to become extinct, it may not affect fight safety proper functioning of the ecosystem initially, but as more and more rivets are removed, the plane becomes dangerously weak over a period of time. Furthermore, which rivet is removed may also be critical. The loss of rivets on the wings are key species that drive major ecosystem functions is obviously a more serious threat to flight safety than the loss of a few rivets on the seats of windows inside the plane. Loss of biodiversity, while it is doubtful if any new species are being added through, the biological wealth of our planet has been has been declining rapidly, and the accusing finger is clearly pointing to human activation. The colonization of tropical Pacific islands by humans is said to have led to the extinction of more than 2,000 species of native birds. The IUCN Red List 2004 documents the extinction of 784 species, including 338 vertebrates, 359 invertebrates, and 87 planets in the last 500 years. Some examples of recent extinctions include the the dodo mauritius, quagga, Africa, thylacine, Australia, Australia, sea cow, Russia, and three subspecies Bali, Javan, Caspian of tiger. In the last 20 years alone have witnessed the disappearance of 27 species. Careful analysis of records shows that extinctions across Texas are not random. Some groups, like amphibians, appear to be more vulnerable to extinction, adding to the given adding to the grim scenario of extinctions is the fact that more than 15,500 species are of all birds worldwide are facing the threat of extinction. Presently, 12% of all bird species, 23% of all mammal species, 32% of all amphibian species, and 31% of all gymnosperm species in the world face the threat of extinction. From the study of the history of life on Earth through fossil records, we learn that large scale loss of species like the one we are currently witnessing have also happened earlier, even before humans appeared on the scene. During the long period, greater than 3 billion years since the origin and diversification of life on Earth, were five episodes of mass extinction of species. How is the sixth extinction presently in progress, different from the previous episodes? The difference is in the rates. The current species extinction rates are estimated to be 101,000 times faster than in the human times, and our activities are responsible for the faster rates. Ecologists warn that if the present trends continues, nearly half all the species on Earth might be wiped out within the next 100 years. In general, loss of biodiversity in a region may lead to a decline in plant production, be lowered on resistance to environmental perpetuation, perturbations such as drought and increase the variability in certain ecosystem processes such as plant cell productivity, water use, and pest and disease cycles, causes of biodiversity losses, and accelerated rates of species extinctions that the world is facing now are largely due to human activities. There are four major causes. The severe quartet is the subject used to describe them. Habitat loss or and fragmentation, this is the most important cause driving animals and plants to extinction. The most dramatic examples of habitat loss come from tropical rainforest, once covering more than 14% of the earth's land surface. These rainforests now covers no more than 6%. They are being they are being destroyed fast. By the time you finish reading this chapter, 1,000 rainforests. It is so huge that it is called lungs of the planet. For cultivating soya beans, for biodiversity, for conservation of grasslands, for raising beef cattle. Besides total loss, the degradation of many habitats by pollution also threatens the survival of many species. When large habitats are broken up into small fragments due to various human activities, mammals and birds requiring large territories, and certain animals with migratory habits are badly affected, leading to population declines. Overexploitation, humans have always depended on nature for food and shelter, but when need turns to greed, it leads to overexploitation of natural resources. Many species extinctions in the last 500 years. Sailors seen sea cow, passenger pigeon were due to overexploitation by humans. Presently, many marine fish populations around the world are the over harvested and endangering the continued existence of some commercially important species. Alien species invasions. When alien species are introduced unintentionally to deliberately for whatever purpose, some of them turn invasive and cause decline or extinction of indigenous species. The perch introduced into Lake Victoria in East Africa led eventually to the extinction of an ecologically unique assemblage of more than 2,200 species of Hachika cichlid fish now in the lake. You must be familiar with the environmental damage caused and a threat posed to our native species by an invasive weed species like carrot grass, Parthenium, lantana, and water hyacinth, Ischornia, and the recent illegal introduction of the African catfish, Clarias garibinus, for aquaculture purposes is posing a threat of to the indigenous catfishes in our rivers. Coextinctions. When a species becomes extinct, the plant and animal species associated with it in an obligatory way also become extinct. When a host fish species becomes extinct, its unique assemblage of parasites also meets the same fate. Another example is the case of cold plant pollinator mutualism, where extinction of one invariably leads to the extinction of the other. 13.2 Biodiversity conservation. Why should we conserve biodiversity? There are many reasons, some obvious, the others not so obvious. But are equally important. They can be grouped into three categories: narrowly utilitarian, broadly utilitarian, and ethical. The narrowly utilitarian arguments for conserving biodiversity are obvious. Humans derive countries countless direct economic benefits from nature. Food, cereals, pulses, fruits, firewood, fibers, fruit, construction material, industrial products, tannins, lubricants, dyes, resins, perfumes, and products of medicinal importance. More than 25% of the drugs currently sold in the market worldwide are derived from plants, and 25,000 species of plants contribute to the traditional medicines used by native peoples around the world. Nobody knows how many more medicinally useful plants there are in tropical rainforests waiting to be explored. With increasing resources put into bias prospecting, exploring molecular, genetic, and species level of diversity for products of economic importance. Nations endowed with rich biodiversity can expect to reap enormous benefits. How do we conserve biodiversity? In situ conservation and ex situ conservation. Then biodiversity and conservation summary. Since life organized originated on Earth nearly 3.8 billion years ago, there had been enormous diversification of life forms on Earth. Diversity refers to the sum total of diversity that exists at all levels of biological organization. Of particular importance is the diversity at genetic species and ecosystem levels, and conservation efforts are aimed at protecting diversity at all these levels. More than 1.5 million species have been recorded in the world, but there might still be nearly 6 million species on Earth waiting to be discovered. The named species, greater than 70% of the animals, of which 70% are insects. The group of fungi has more species than all the vertebrate species combined. India, with about 45,000 species of plants and twice as many species of animals, is one of the 12 mega diversity countries of the world. Species diversity on Earth is not uniformly distributed but shows interesting patterns. It is generally highest in the tropics and decreases towards the poles. Important explanations for the species richness of the tropics had more evolutionary time. They provide a relatively constant environment, and they receive more solar energy, which contributes to greater productivity. As a species richness is also function of the area of a region. The species area relationship is generally or rectangular or hyperbolic function. It is believed that communities with high diversity tend to be less variable, more productive, and more resistant to biological invasions. Earth fossil history reveals incidents of mass extinctions in the past, but the present rates of extinction largely attributed to human activities. The are 100 to 1000 times higher. Nearly 700 species have become extinct in recent times, and more than 15,500 species, of which greater than 650 are from India, currently face the threat of extinction. The causes of high currently face the threat of extinction. The causes of high and fragmentation, over exploitation. High extinction rates at present include habitat, particularly forest loss, extinction loss and fragmentation, over exploitation, biological invasions, and co-extinctions. Earth's rich biodiversity is vital for the very survival of mankind. The reasons for conserving biodiversity are narrowly utilitarian, broadly utilitarian, and ethical. Are besides the direct benefits, food, fiber, firewood, pharmaceuticals, etc. There are no, there are many indirect benefits we receive through ecosystem services such as pollination, pest control, climate moderation, and food control. Now we also have moral responsibility to take good care of Earth's biodiversity and pass it on in good order to our next generation. Biodiversity conservation may be in situ as well as ex situ. In situ conservation, the endangered species are protected in their natural habitat, so that the entire ecosystem is protected. Recently, 34 34 biodiversity hotspots in the world have been proposed for intensive conservation efforts. Of these, three Western Ghats, Sri Lanka, Himalaya, and Indo-Burma cover India's rich biodiversity regions. Out countries in situ conservation efforts are reflected in its 14 biosphere reserves, 90 national parks, greater than 450 wildlife sanctuaries, and many sacred groves. Access to conservation methods include the protective maintenance of threatened species in zoological parks and botanical gardens, in vitro fertilization, tissue culture, propagation, and cryopreservation of gametes. बायोडाइवर्सिटी एंड कंजर्वेशन 13 नंबर का हमारा चैप्टर है, जिसमें हमने पहले से देखा बायोडाइवर्सिटी, देन जेनेटिक डाइवर्सिटी, स्पेसिस डाइवर्सिटी, इकोलॉजिकल डाइवर्सिटी, हाउ मेनी स्पेसीज आर देयर ऑन अर्थ एंड हाउ मेनी इन इंडिया, pattern of biodiversity, then species area relationship, then importance of species diversity to the ecosystem, then loss of biodiversity, then habitat loss and fragmentation, then overexploitation, then biodiversity conservation, why should we conserve biodiversity, how do we conserve biodiversity, in situ conservation, ex situ conservation, then summary, biodiversity and conservation. 30 नंबर का हमारा चैप्टर खत्म होता है यहाँ पर. थैंक यू सो मच फॉर वॉचिंग. प्लीज़ लाइक शेयर एंड सब्सक्राइब.